Hello, welcome. This is DW News. We are streaming on YouTube from Berlin and also on TikTok, and as well as on good old-fashioned TV. And with me in the studio is my colleague Binish Javed.
Hi everyone. All eyes are on Pakistan today. We are looking at a massive make or break moment for the global stage, Gerhard, as the Prime Minister of Pakistan had said.
Yes, it is indeed. US Vice President JD Vance just touched down in Islamabad for a high-stakes face-off with Iran. He's brought along Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to try and turn a shaky ceasefire into a real peace deal. But the vibes are actually quite spooky. Islamabad is a ghost town. The streets are empty, the city's on lockdown, and the tension is through the roof. Before he even landed, Vance warned Iran, do not play us. But Iran isn't backing down. Their lead negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, says they will not even talk unless Israel stops the strikes in Lebanon and the US unblocks Iranian cash that is currently frozen. And just very recently, a senior Iranian source told the Reuters news agency the US had already agreed to defrost those assets. Now, why does all that matter to you? Well, two words: oil prices. With Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz, gas prices are still soaring and the global economy is getting hammered. Brent crude is hitting $97 and climbing. It was around $70 before Trump decided to put on the war paint. But Trump is calling it like he sees it, saying Iran is militarily defeated and just trying to extort the world. So, is all this now the beginning of a peace deal there in Islamabad? Or is everything about to boil over? Binish and I will try and break it all down right now with the help of our expert, who we'll bring in a few moments.
Do post your questions in the chat. I'll try to answer them or answer them myself or pass them to our expert.
Exactly. First, Binish, give us a brief update where we stand right now in this ceasefire and this whole peace process.
So, Gerhard, right now talks are happening. We exactly don't know if the direct talks between the Iranians and Americans are happening, or if they are being facilitated by Pakistan.
So we're not sure whether they're actually directly talking.
Also because officials are completely tight-lipped on this. So there's no information coming out of the hotel from where these talks are happening. But we know JD Vance, just a couple of hours ago, he arrived in Pakistan. He was received by, if you can also see those pictures, JD Vance was received by the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, the Interior Minister of Pakistan, and the Army Chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, which is very unusual. But Asim Munir, the Field Marshal, has been involved in this mediation process throughout since the war started. So we see him receiving JD Vance. And last night, the Iranian delegation arrived, actually a big delegation. Some sources say around 70 people from Iran have arrived. And here we can also see that the military chief received the Iranian delegation, also the Interior Minister and the Foreign Minister. And right now in Islamabad, these two warring parties with maximalist demands, at least publicly what we know, are finally talking in Islamabad. We still, as I said, don't know if they're direct talks or these talks are still, again, being facilitated by Pakistan.
I mean, you just pointed twice to the fact that they were received by a high-ranking military officer there. What do you read into that?
So the military has played, from the very beginning, an active role in diplomacy, in making sure that the conflict does not expand. Military has its own interest. Pakistan shares border with Iran, so security is an important issue. Pakistani Field Marshal Asim Munir has been very publicly doing diplomatic activities. He has met Donald Trump twice. Donald Trump has called him his favorite Field Marshal. So with the Prime Minister, Asim Munir has been visible throughout these diplomatic channels. He has visited Saudi Arabia twice, and even now, when these talks are happening, military officials, along with the police, are protecting. There's a high security perimeter. If we can also see those visuals, Gerhard,
security is quite a nightmare right now, is it?
It is a huge nightmare. Islamabad is under complete lockdown. There has been a 2-day public holiday. So these pictures are of Serena Hotel in Islamabad, and all the hotel guests were asked to check out from this hotel.
They were just kicked out?
Yes, because they just thought that this place is very central, and the negotiations and the talks are happening here. You can see how tight the security is. There is a complete perimeter around the hotel. Nobody is allowed to get close to the hotel premises where these talks are happening. And even international media, I mean, there are dozens of journalists right now in Islamabad covering these talks, but even journalists are not allowed to enter anywhere close to the hotel. The pictures that we are seeing right now, that's another venue. And this venue is for the journalists who are here to cover, I would say, the most consequential talks the whole world right now is watching. So for the media, you can see this room. They have these big picture screens of all international news organizations, and media is being facilitated in this venue to report on this event.
Okay, so this stage is set. Thank you for that, Binish. But let's go to our expert, Professor Sultan Barakat. He's a Senior Associate Fellow of the RUSI Defense and Security think tank in London. Professor, thank you for joining us today on this live stream. And now we are seeing a very specific US delegation. Let's start with that. Vice President Vance, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. What does the composition of this team signal to Tehran?
Well, I think the most important addition to the team that has already negotiated with them, at least in 2 rounds, is the Vice President Vance. That, I think, is a signal which probably gives the Iranian a little bit more confidence than before, but also, frankly, gives the Americans and everyone else the confidence that this is a state-to-state negotiations and not how Trump has framed it in the past, that this is a personal position of his, supported by his personal advisors, which, of course, the Iranians have experienced and have been disappointed by. As you would appreciate, both Witkoff and Kushner lack international diplomacy experience, although they may be good negotiators in commercial sense. And of course, they lack the accountability issue. They are not necessarily accountable to anyone in the United States except for the president, who in the eyes of the Iranians seems to be totally unhinged at the moment and doing things based on his personal preference and giving out very erratic messages and often contradictory ones. So from that perspective, I think the Iranians would now have slightly more confidence that the Americans are serious. And of course, also, if you look at it from a personal perspective, Vance has much more at stake in the success of these talks than the other 2. And frankly, even again, maybe more than Trump himself, because Vance, unlike Trump, still stands the chance of being elected as a president for the United States without needing to change the Constitution, which Trump is sometimes talking about. So for him, he could be also seen as the savior of the Republican Party in the coming elections. So his introduction into this, I think, is a very important step.
Now, what do you make of the fact, in terms of signaling, that the US is sending someone who was notably opposed to this war?
Well, that adds to the reasoning, I think, behind having Vance heading the team. Of course, publicly, he never opposed the war. He always presented a united front alongside the boss. But we know that privately he's been briefing the president about his concerns in relation to this war and the potential of it going really, really wrong for them. particularly on the economic side. As you know, all what happened in terms of Iran's reaction and the closure of the Hormuz Strait and all this, none of this was a surprise, although Trump said as much. He said he was surprised by the Iranian reaction. Anyone who's done any work on Iran over the last 10, 20 years would have said, would have known that this would be Iranian step one to retaliate. So from that perspective, again, it's important. He probably will be more concerned about bringing this to an end, and particularly about allowing the economic circumstances, situation globally, to settle a little bit. Today, the inflation rates in the United States has hit highest in 4 years, and that must be very much on Vance's mind as he approaches the talks.
Mr. Sultan, I have a question for you. So you've mentioned a lot is at stake for JD Vance politically. I'm wondering, JD Vance traveled all the way to Pakistan. Do you think that some sort of some sort of settlement or agreement has already been done? Because we see the US delegation landing in Pakistan, big Iranian delegation landing in Pakistan. They probably can't be discussing the most tough and contentious issues just right now.
Well, I'm sure behind the doors, some initial agreements have been reached, because the initial exchanges of 10 versus 15 points between the two sides did not really overlap on many of the points. There were a lot of differences, a huge gap between them. But some calming down would probably have taken place. We hear around the issue of the frozen assets that are held, money held for the Iranians, particularly the assets held in Doha here, that those would be allowed to be passed on to Iran. Those were linked to previous round of negotiations that involved exchange of prisoners, 5 American prisoners versus 5 Iranian prisoners some months ago. So some of these small points, I think, would have been agreed in order to encourage both sides to come to the table. And of course, the pressure that has been now presented on Israel by the United States to stop its attacks on Lebanon would have been another point that encouraged the sides to come to Islamabad.
Now, just as a quick update, the White House has just confirmed that JD Vance and the Mr. Sharif are actually meeting right now before these talks get into gear properly, face-to-face, between US and Iran. But I would like, Professor, let's turn the attention to Israel, which is continuing its strikes in Lebanon, even as ceasefire talks are beginning. How can that rather fragile ceasefire actually hold if the primary proxy conflict between Israel and Hezbollah remains active?
Yes, well, I think for that ceasefire to turn into a proper peace arrangements, there is no way but to address the issue of Israel. We all know that Israel instigated this confrontation between the United States and Iran, and we also know that the Israeli Prime Minister is using it as a way to postpone his own appearance in court on charges of corruption. And he has been wanting to have this confrontation between the US and Iran for decades. So without addressing that directly, I don't think there will be long-term peace arrangements to be enjoyed by countries in the region. And of course, to address that, there are much more fundamental issues that have to be brought to the table, including the Israeli-Palestinian problem, which has started all of this in the aftermath of 7th of October, the Israeli ambitions in Lebanon, the way they're expanding, now they're talking about occupying and keeping a security zone in Lebanon similar to the one that they've kept in Gaza. Now, 50% of Gaza is being considered as a security zone by the Israelis, and nothing has happened since the signing of that ceasefire 6 months ago. And they've also acquired a considerable amount of land from Syria, all were done on the back of the 7th of October. And I think for this to become a proper format for stability in the region, Israel's issue has got to be addressed. Now, are they likely to be addressed directly between Iran and Israel? I think it's very unlikely at this stage. And certainly it will not be taking place in Islamabad. Islamabad, although they are presenting themselves as an impartial mediator at the moment, they are principled in their criticism of Israel's criminality over the last 3 years. And they've said as much, and it's very unlikely that they will invite Israel to Islamabad at any time soon.
Can we just have a look at the U.S. Position right now? Just like to play a quick soundbite from President Trump, if we have that ready.
No nuclear weapon, number one. You know, I think it's already been regime change, but we never had that as a criteria. No nuclear weapon. That's 99% of it.
So 99% of that peace deal being that Iran gives up on the nuclear arsenal. How likely is that going to happen, do you think?
Well, the original position was that Iran had no nuclear weapons, and Iran had no ambition to develop nuclear weapons. And the former supreme leader had a fatwa that stops the Iranians from developing nuclear weapon. So that is already, in a sense, there, and it's something that the Americans can achieve easily. What is problematic, I think, is the enrichment of uranium and the level that Iran will be allowed to take that enrichment to, and the level in which Iran can be independent in its enrichment. What the Americans and some of the Western nations would like to happen is Iran has the ability to produce energy using enriched uranium, but they will not have the ability to produce the capsules required to run those plants. So they have to go and buy it or get the enrichment from ideally Western nations. They refuse the idea of Russia. But from an Iranian perspective, this is unworkable because it makes their energy dependent on somebody else's interest again. So what's the point of developing an energy program to try and work around the fact that their oil, they need to sell as much as possible of it overseas. They don't want to be consuming it locally. So they need to have their energy independence. There's no point of saying we have an energy program using nuclear power, but every time we need to fire those plants, we need to go and buy the capsules from elsewhere.
So you don't think, excuse me for interrupting there, but so you don't think that the Iran nuclear program is about acquiring nuclear weapons?
No, I don't think it was. Maybe now there will be corners within Iran who call for a nuclear weapon, having been attacked in this way, and they've proven that there are powers in the region that can reach right into the heart of Iran. Maybe now people will say, well, this must happen. But I think what we've been hearing all the way is that there is no program. And it's not just what I say or what I hear, it's what the nuclear agencies have again and again confirmed. Many of the European countries have confirmed. And it was on those bases that European countries have engaged in negotiations with Iran again and again. They do understand that there are maybe ambitions, scientific ambitions to push as much as possible. But I don't think there was a clear aim. And of course, the attacks both in June last year and then some of the attacks that were conducted now in this war. And we should not forget the assassination of tens of scientists that Israel has carried out in Iran would now make it very, very difficult for the Iranians to re-engage. Even if they had that objective, they are unable to re-engage in the same capacity.
Well, okay, the US says, of course, that Iran is very close to enriching to a level that could be used in nuclear weapons. But I would like to come to viewer questions.
To go back to what Mr. Kent, the head of the counterterrorism that resigned his post, as well as the head of the Joint Intelligence from the United States, both came out and said, we never had that evidence. We never had the evidence that an imminent threat of Iran producing any nuclear weapon was ever there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's out there for the audience to judge.
Exactly. Speaking of the audience, we have a question.
Yes, we have a question, and I would also like to talk a little bit on Strait of Hormuz. This question is, what are the economic consequences because of this conflict? And I think, Mr. Sultan, you will agree that a lot of pressure from the world has come also because a lot of economies in the world are being affected by the blockade of Strait of Hormuz. So what would be the absolute win if the talks go well? What would be the absolute win for the U.S.? Do you think if they're open, if there's a compromise on Strait of Hormuz, could that be something that would be at least acceptable to both sides?
Yes, again, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz was not an issue before the war. Now it has become an issue. And I think Trump has cornered himself by declaring it as the main purpose of these talks. I won't be surprised if the Iranians were suddenly to tweet and say the Strait is open. I mean, in their own mind, the Strait has remained open, but it is open selectively. They are not allowing certain nations, particularly ships associated with Israel and the United States and some of their allies, to pass. So they will probably reinforce that position. And as you know, they put out this map a couple of days ago where they've highlighted certain areas that they've said they may be high risk. So they're trying to use psychologically pressure on the shipping companies, the insurance companies, to make sure that you can, if they decide to use the Strait of Hormuz, they need to pass through certain tracks that are closer to Iran and under their direct possibilities of monitoring and control. So I think this is something that is likely to be addressed quite early on in the talks. I think it's in Iran's interest to do so. It will allow the U.S. administration, particularly President Trump, a way out where he can preserve some of his dignity around what he's promised to his people. And it will also, very importantly, calm their neighbors and start re-establishing trust between them and the Gulf states. Some of those Gulf states have not exported oil or LNG now for weeks, and that has major consequences on their economy, which again Iran needs in the future if they're going to engage in reconstruction activities, banking, communication with the rest of the world. They're quite reliant on the Gulf states, particularly Qatar and the United Arab Emirates.
I would like to remind our viewers and to encourage our viewers to post your questions that you might have in the comments, both on YouTube and on TikTok.
Yeah. If I may, one more question on Strait of Hormuz. So what could be acceptable for the U.S.? Even if Iran says, even if it opens Strait of Hormuz, it's asking for a lot of money. There are some reports even up to $2 million as a toll tax. What could be an acceptable thing, and which, of course, Donald Trump has said it would be unacceptable. But then Iran says that it needs that money as reparations for the damages, war damages. So what could be something that's acceptable to both sides?
To be honest, I don't think things will ever go back to what they were before. And I don't think Iran would allow it. I don't think it's in the interest of the region's stability to also allow it, because now everyone will have to rethink the whole security architecture around the region and the level of engagement by the United States. Now, the U.S. would probably want a total opening of the Strait. But given what Trump has been saying recently, that, we don't really rely on this Strait, it's somebody else's problem and so on, I think he would not mind postponing this and leaving it as a hot potato for the Europeans and the agents and the Arab states to deal with. These are the people that rely on the Strait. So my assessment of what Trump's reaction would be is the moment the Iranians say it's open, even if there were some restrictions, he will jump on it and say, yes, great, I've done it. It's now open. It's up to you to work out whether there will be a toll, whether there will be some money charged, etc. This is something for you to work out. Now, when it comes to the region, we need to remember that the territorial waters of Iran and Oman, in fact, overlap. So there is no real international waters between these two countries. The Strait connects two international waters in the form of the Arabian Sea and the Gulf. But it is really ultimately up to Oman and Iran to work out a protocol in which they secure the Strait and they allow it to be as effectively used as possible. And this is something that the Iranians have already started talking to Omanis over. And also, as you probably know, Iran has not verified the UN Convention on the Open Seas, which was passed in 1982, and signed by the Iranians initially, but was never really verified because of those concerns. The worst scenario, I think, would be if the Iranians insist on putting out a message that no, it's not open, and this is going, and it keeps the price going up. I think maybe the Americans will have no option but to intervene physically, and the forces that Trump has sent, in addition to those that have been resting for the last few days, will then occupy some of the strategic islands in the Gulf in order to control the traffic. And that they may also use it to drag the Arab states in by suggesting that the islands such as Abu Musa, which is contested by United Arab Emirates, can now be given sovereignty to the UAE. So this will evolve into yet another problem, but something that the Americans will pass on to the region to deal with.
Now, Binish, we have another viewer question there.
We have one more question from one of our TikTok users, and they're asking, could the ceasefire be a buy for time to get NATO into Hormuz, so basically, or more US troops on the ground? Or we are far from that scenario?
I think the whole pause is on both sides, and Israel was badly needed to rest and resupply and rearm and reload their weapons. You know, the supply chain for the very expensive missiles used by the United States was already under a lot of stress, including in terms of air defenses in the Gulf and Israel in particular. So it is of use to both sides. The Iranians will probably also need time. They needed time to bury their supreme leader. They needed time to reconnect with each other, to reestablish their political posture, communication, and so on. So it's, in that sense, it can be used by all sides to rest and re-engage again. Having said that, I think it will be at much greater cost if they decide to do it this way, because now they've raised the hopes, particularly amongst the civilian population in both Israel and Iran, that things can go back to normal. And I think that will come at a great political cost if they were to engage in a war. Also, in terms of the timing of all this, we know that the Americans have continued to send troops to the region. And as I was saying earlier, one scenario is the possibility of using them to occupy islands.
I think we'll leave it here for the moment. Thank you very much, Professor Sultan Barakat, Associate Fellow of the RUSI Defense and Security Think Tank in London. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
And we would now like to discuss, and you can keep your questions coming, because we talk about Pakistan now and the role that it has assumed in all this. It's quite astonishing, isn't it?
Gerhard, yes, absolutely. I think it was very surprising for most of the world. For many years, we see that the country of Pakistan, it was isolated by Washington, even at the world stage, especially under the last US administration. US developed very close ties with Pakistan's arch rival, India. And there were very, very limited relations between US and Pakistan. Especially, I think it started when US pulled out of Afghanistan. But all of a sudden, we now see Pakistan in the limelight. I think there are many reasons behind why Pakistan gained this position. I think some of it came naturally. Pakistan shares border with Iran. Pakistan has already difficult border with eastern border with India, western border with Afghanistan. It did not want to have more instability in other border. Pakistan generally, whenever there is a conflict in the region, it directly gets affected. Pakistan also wanted to, I believe, increase its diplomatic stature in the world and use this event to use its diplomacy. It has good ties with the United States, good ties with Iran, and also with other countries in the region. And I think all of a sudden, I would say, this of course, gave Pakistan a lot of limelight. And when I follow Pakistani journalists, Pakistani people on social media, there's a lot of pride now also in Pakistan that their country is facilitating, is a peacemaker. It's in the news for good reasons, not for all the horrible and terrible.
And we're gonna come to the pride part in a moment. But first, what's at stake for Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, now that these negotiations happen on his soil?
There's a lot at stake. They have increased, as our guest was saying, Mr. Sultan, that there is now a certain level of expectation. The last time any US Vice President came to Pakistan was in 2011. So after around more than 15 years or so, a US high-ranking official, Vice President of the United States, has come to Pakistan. Already it has raised a lot of expectation in Pakistan that Pakistan is a very important country. Then this big Iranian delegation is here, and Pakistan has put out this massive show. There are boasters of Islamabad talks. They're calling it Islamabad talks. Gerhard, if they materialize, if they succeed, this will be history for Pakistan, a great history in Pakistan that, Islamabad talks were the talks that brought the two countries on the negotiating table and ended the war that has affected millions of people across the world. So a lot at stake also for Pakistan, and I think also on both sides.
Pakistan, of course, in the spotlight on the world stage right now. But some say, as important as Pakistan's role may be, they're just sort of hosting, and the real people behind this is Beijing. What can you say?
I mean, there are some reports that Beijing played a very important role. It intervened the last minute when the deadline was approaching, when Donald Trump had basically threatened that, he will wipe out the Iranian civilization. And there are reports that at that time, China activated, and it reportedly gave some guarantees to Iran, and that kind of lowered the temperature. Of course, Pakistan also played a decisive role, but other countries were also involved. Turkey, Egypt, and remember, just in the end of March, Saudi Arabian foreign minister, along with Turkish and Egyptian foreign minister, were in Islamabad. There was a quadrilateral meeting. So other countries were definitely involved, but Pakistan, I think, took the role as a main role of being the facilitator of these talks. And I just told you there are many, many reasons because of which Pakistan probably wanted to be the main country, but definitely other actors, regional countries were involved.
Now, let's talk about the mood in Pakistan. You've already mentioned it. People are proud. There's also going on a lot of chat on social media, right?
Yes, I mean, Pakistanis, I would say they are celebrating. They think that their country, as I said, after many, many years, it's in the limelight for good reasons. Pakistan is not being accused of anything. It's not all the natural, like floods or earthquakes or terrorism that usually...
It's true. If I have Pakistan in the news shows, it's normally about something like this.
Yes, that's, I mean, my lifetime, if I look back, all the like it's always like bad news, bad reputation of the country. Very few moments where, you know, Pakistanis felt proud of Pakistan. And I think this, how Pakistanis see it, is this as their moment to shine. Their country is facilitating peace. It is acting as something that is, it is trying to stop a war that has affected a lot of people. And that means Pakistan internet is being stormed. And when I look at my Instagram, Twitter, it's full of memes. And maybe we can show some of them to our viewers.
Yes, please do.
So, for example, this one, right when we found out that, you know, Pakistan is playing the mediator role, we saw this tweet went viral. Pakistanis across the globe walking into the work this morning, realizing their country stopped another war. And if I can play the music as well.
Yeah, I think that's John Travolta from the movie is called Staying Alive.
Yes. And then, and we had not only this, when the country got to know, okay, I have to go back, sorry. When the country got to know that JD Vance is coming to Pakistan, then internet was completely stormed. Again, I said that, you know, last time when any US Vice President came to Pakistan was 2011. And a lot of Pakistani celebrated through some AI images. And if we can show some of the images to our viewers. So what you see right now on the screen is AI image of Mr. JD Vance having a very famous Pakistani food, nehari, in Lahore. And then there are others as well. Here he is in Hunza, a very beautiful location in Pakistan. And he's, again, an AI image, but he's enjoying Pakistani food in Hunza. And this one actually is my favorite. This is, again, just to say that this is an AI image. And Savor Foods, this is really delicious, Gerhard. This food is basically rice with chicken, but it's quite popular and very famous, and we see AI image of JD Vance outside Savor Foods. And this Quetta cafes or Quetta hotels are also very popular among people, and we also see that he's having paratha, like it's a fried flatbread with egg, a traditional breakfast, again an AI image. And then, what we see now on the screen is, and maybe I can play it.
Is that JD Vance as well? No, it's not.
This is not JD Vance, but basically they're saying that this is JD Vance after seeing the fuel prices in Pakistan. So he's on a donkey.
I see.
He cannot afford the fuel price. Fuel is so expensive, and which is true. Gerhard, Strait of Hormuz has affected Pakistan. The blockade of Strait of Hormuz has affected Pakistan. Pakistan has increased fuel prices in last couple of days twice. It was reduced later, but Pakistanis, most of the income right now of an average Pakistani is going on transportation cost, on fuel cost. So it also shows you and when we talk about economy, so here we see JD Vance in his hotel room after converting USD into Pakistan currency. And that is also humor, but it reflects the poor state of Pakistani economy. And after all the food pictures that we saw earlier, one user posted this, that after 3 days of JD Vance having Pakistani cuisine, he has put on some weight.
It's going to look like that on the right. OK, thank you very much, Pinish, for getting us acquainted with Pakistani humor on the internet right now. Is actually really quite funny. And I think that's it for today, for our live stream. Thank you very much for watching, for sending in your questions, and hope to see you again real soon.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.